that could create some unintended inequities?
Certainly. What we're currently proposing is to maintain what we have in terms of funding. Again, as I mentioned before, we have not yet come out and said anything about how long we intend to have a hold harmless in place. That's still something that we're considering. However, we think it would be difficult to redistribute funding at this time that supports the existing infrastructure. I think in addition, what we're looking at in terms of future funding as the legislature decides to add additional funds to these programs, that we would like it to go out in a more equitable, formula-driven way as opposed to the current structure, especially with the contracts that go out sort of based on an RFA process.
Okay, so to be fair, you're well aware of the concerns. It's a work in progress.
Certainly.
All right. That may be the answer to my next question as well, but I'll ask it nonetheless. Ms. Early had stated that shifting to all vouchers could potentially mean a loss of some developmentally appropriate care.
Certainly, that question is something that I think is not only very high in our minds, I think it's very up in front and in center of the minds of our stakeholders and in a lot of the feedback that we've heard. And what we're hoping to see when CDE puts together the proposal is a single level of minimum quality standards for our program. Currently, we have Title, as they call themselves, or as we call them, Title 22 providers and Title 5 providers. And I think what we're looking for is, instead of having two systems for quality, looking at a single set of minimum standards for the entire state. So we're in agreement with the LAO, I think, on that point.
And this is for both of you, is it accurate to suggest that some additional funding could resolve the concern you've raised?
Sorry, some additional funding.
That if we go to all vouchers, that's the concern, that there could be some loss of developmentally appropriate care.
Right.
That's under current funding levels. Add some more money, that could be addressed.
Right. I mean, in any transition, the legislature could consider whether to provide additional funding to train current voucher providers to meet new standards.
We are not
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We are not at this time proposing additional funding in this area, just to be clear.
I'm well aware of that. Senator Hancock, Senator Monning, and then Senator Pan hasn't asked a question yet. We'll go in that order, and then we'll get everybody else.
Some of the other questioners, I'm trying to get an idea of what this would actually look like and mean for a real family. I can see the reasoning in keeping the current infrastructure in place by allowing the current programs to continue. The standards issue, I think, can be dealt with. I know that many of the child care coordinating councils, certainly at least one in my area, do training for family-based child care providers, and especially if we could work with the community colleges to even get some career pathways set, I think that would be very positive. It would take money. Many child care family providers are working on a razor thin, I mean, they can barely feed the children on what the reimbursement rates are. So you would have to have an infusion of money to encourage that increased education. It seems to me. And if additional money would be targeted to address the inequitable distribution issue, are we to understand that if not this year, the administration intends to add more money? Otherwise, why continue the historical pattern?
I think that we believe that there are many things that we can do within our existing funding. If we're thinking outside of the current parameters of how we provide childcare, every discussion about additional funding is going to be something that we look at each year as we consider, our resources that we have versus the different priorities that we have. So at this time, I can't make a guarantee that we will be looking at additional funding in future years.
Well, I think that's a problem because it implies that we may be taking a system that we all believe, even with the lack of data, not to be serving all eligible children, and simply moving moving the pieces around in some way. It would seem to me a year to introduce a new system is one thing, but then there should be a commitment to add the pieces that are perceived not to be there now. I also just, I'm very concerned when we talk about a more market-driven model, and I'm not sure what the LAO means about that. I know that we're having problems in the area I represent, which is a high-income area, San Francisco Bay Area, with the reimbursement rates just being too low to either make it in a higher in a higher cost area, or being too low to have many providers accept them. So how would you imagine the market? Are you really talking about higher reimbursement rates and high need, high cost areas?
Yeah, so currently the state, as Jessica mentioned earlier, the state has based its reimbursement rates for vouchers off of several different market surveys from different years that do vary based on cost in various counties. Currently, when we say move to a more market-driven structure, we mean more specifically update to the most recent market survey and then pick a percentile that the state can afford. And so we calculate within existing resources, the state can afford to go to about the 65th percentile of that 2014 survey, which means that in every county or in every area of the state, families would have access to about 65% of the market in their area.
And what does that mean? Families with 65% of the median?
Sorry, so families.
Market rate is $10 a day. The state will reimburse $6.50.
So say there is a range of provider prices in the county. Some providers, these are artificial numbers, some providers cost $5, some providers cost $7, some providers cost $12, and some providers cost $20. So by setting the rates at the 65th percentile, obviously those numbers are not accurate. By setting the rates at the 65th percentile, that means you should be able to pay for care at 65% of the providers based on the distribution of prices in an area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, that's helpful. And then just to the Department of Finance, when you look at the preschool programs, are you planning to make more of them full day so they can in fact serve working parents more effectively?
So the question with that is, in a lot of ways, because we're dealing with a pot of money and we're looking at the time in the classroom is, and this is a question we're still grappling with, is do we serve more children for a shorter period of time or fewer children but for a longer period of time? And I think that that's something that we're definitely exploring through our stakeholder process, and it's not something that we've come to a
And then when would a decision be made? Because this is all about choices, as
it is.
the governor has pointed out and that we often point out to each other. When would a decision be made to serve the same number of children but full day, which would require more money?
I'm sorry, I was understanding. You're asking if we will ever, if the administration will ever make that decision? Is that what you're asking?
Well, if we're looking at a quality program for very young children from low-income families whose parents we expect to be working, and we know the importance of early education, why would we even consider saying half the number of children for the full day, even though a working parent with an 8-hour day may require a full day? Why would we not want to increase the block grant so that all the currently served low-income children could continue to be served but full day?
So certainly that's something that the legislature can consider. At this time, we are not proposing adding additional funding, and so we're looking to make the best decisions within the existing funding amount that we have.
Thank you.
And just one comment.
Yes.
So on the LAO side, we're suggesting nothing occur for families and providers in 16-17. So if there is a 4-year-old out there and their family is thinking there's a TK option for them in the fall, we're suggesting, encouraging you to think about leaving that in place. There's still lots of decisions, policies that the legislature could put in place to give those 3-year-olds, those families, a year heads up as to what their program might look like a year from now. Because both on the preschool and the childcare side, we think there are significant flaws with the existing policies. And as you're hearing, the administration isn't offering you much detail. Whether it's now or a few months from now or next season, we would just encourage you to think about what program do you want? What kind of eligibility criteria, providers, that ultimately you as policymakers will want to probably take the reins of this and decide what programs you think are best on both sides.
Ms. Gu, that's
And the degree to which we want to fund them.
well, that's going to be the whole process, of course, but I think you've laid out a very important point that I think we might want to keep in mind is that as we review the governor's proposal as it comes into view and we have greater detail, that we also have to be prepared with what is an appropriate lead time for all of our constituents so that they can be prepared for what is up ahead. And I think your caution is wise. Again, this is going to take us a while to receive, to digest, to debate funding levels, and at the same time give our constituents enough forewarning so that they can appropriately plan. We have Senator Monning, then Senator Pan, Senator Allen, Senator Morlock, Senator Roth, and all questions and comments are encouraged and welcome, of course. Also, just to point out that we do have one more panel, and then we do want to leave some time for public comment, and we're going to be on the floor at noon. So, Senator Monning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and panel members. I'm going to pick up on some of the questions of Senator Hancock on the recommendations from the LAO about a more market-driven model. So when I hear that, I'm just curious, so market affects what it costs providers to provide services. It also affects what families have to work with, not just with respect what part of their income could go to childcare, but when it's going other places as well. But on the provider side, when you look at a market-driven model, how do we not necessarily have to look at increasing the rates that would be paid? And what happens in communities where they've raised minimum wage, like the city of San Jose, Los Angeles? Would that be factored in to what a provider reimbursement rate would be?
Yes, so to the extent that local areas have raised their minimum wage, that should and that has resulted in increase in costs in childcare providers, that should be reflected in the most recent market rates, which is why we would recommend updating to the most recent market rates and picking what percentage of providers you want families to be able to access within that given market, instead of basing it off of market surveys that are in some cases 10 years out of date.
Thank you. And so that would address the provider side of the equation. What about a family, a wage earner who is now earning more in a increased minimum wage market? How's it going to affect their eligibility for their child or children to qualify for childcare services? Will there be a tipping point where they lose eligibility, but their income's not adequate to pay on the private market for childcare? So they get put in a position where they're earning more in their paycheck, so much so potentially that they lose eligibility, but they're not earning enough in that paycheck to now cover that cost on their own.
So as I mentioned before briefly when I was providing a broad overview, for most childcare programs, the eligibility criteria is 70% of state median income as defined in 2007. So we have recommended that the state be a little more transparent about what percentage of state median income it's actually paying, and updating to the most recent state median income. Based on our look at the 2014 state median income, we think the current eligibility threshold is actually about 60% of state median income. And so at a very minimum, we would recommend that the state update to 60% of this 2014 state median income, as it's more transparent about what the state is actually paying.
Thank you, but again, how good a guide is a statewide median when you have such regional diversity?
Yeah, the state could also consider whether it wanted to do it based on regional median income as well, but we would recommend that the state be transparent about what it's actually paying for.
Thank you, and then for Department of Finance, any comments on those questions?
Certainly, it's something that we're aware of and considering as part of our process as we're considering our early ed block grant and moving forward with that.
I mean, I think it's an issue clearly for today's hearing for childcare and eligibility, but on a broader spectrum, for all programs seeking to bridge gaps between income and capacity of working poor in communities where we see an increase in minimum wage, but not a commensurate adjustment of eligibility. My fear is that we're going to reach a tipping point where families lose eligibility, but they're not earning enough to go on the open market to pay for these services. Yeah. So I just think we have to be mindful in statewide averages just aren't going to address the reality that families and providers are facing. So appreciate your continued work. Yes, if you have a comment, please.
Well, we have heard this concern, obviously. We know of counties, cities that are raising minimum wage or considering it if they haven't already. And I'm sorry that the numbers I'm not entirely sure, but I think our calculation at $10 was something like $20-some thousand. The cutoff per year for family, the cutoff here is $42,000. The point being, even if I'm wrong on the numbers, which I know I'm wrong a bit, the full-time worker making minimum wage would still qualify. We aren't aware of any example, even at slightly higher minimum wage cutoffs, where that family would no longer be eligible for care.
Senator Monti, I think what Ms. Coons is saying, that even when San Francisco in 2018 gets to $15 an hour, that's still only $30,000 a year, significantly below the $42,000 current cutoff.
So that's helpful on the eligibility side of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Monti. We have Senator Pan, Senator Allen, Senator Morlock, Senator Roth, and then Senator Mitchell, maybe. Okay. All right. Senator Pan.
Thank you so very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the effort to try to, I think, simplify our child care system, and I also appreciate that both the governor's office, our Department of Finance, and LAO agree that we need to have developmental standards. As a pediatrician and someone who knows about developmental child development, we can't just park the kids, right? We need to have standards, and I hope that it's really important that we actually have accountability. So the challenge is you provide vouchers that there's some accountability, that the services being provided are of appropriate standard, and that the data is being collected. It's just not like, here's the money, I'm trusting it. So I hope that will be part of the system. One of the questions I have is, and I don't know whether you'd have the answer to this, do you know what's the market share of our state child care program in terms of the total child care being provided in the state? I mean, is the state funding 10%, 25%, 50% of all child care in the state? I realize that we've asked the question about the number of eligible people, and we're probably around 20% of eligible children for people are eligible. But just in terms of what's the market share of the state's payment for child care type service and early childhood education compared to overall?
So
scale.
We don't know how many license exempt providers there are, but based on data from the, on license capacity, we know that there are about 1 million license capacity slots in licensed centers and family childcare homes.
So that makes us about what percentage? I'm trying to look at the number.
Well, I guess,
There's 10.
well, if we have 436,000 slots, and you probably want to subtract TK out because, so whatever 430 minus 80,000 is, I don't have my
So, okay,
calculator.
and that's out of how many again, you said?
About 1 million.
Yeah, so we're about third, right? I mean, a little over third. I'm just doing real quick.
Yeah, but many of the slots that the state pays for are going to be license exempt slots, so it's, we're less than a third.
Okay, all right, but still a major player in the child care world, right? Purchasing. So the reason I want to just touch on that is that the policies that we're making here, just a reminder for everyone, is not just for kids who are from low-income families, because especially if you have a voucher system, you're probably talking to child care providers who provide, some may provide a mix, right? They have to, right? Someone who's actually run a child care center. So I think that it's important for the public to understand that the decisions we're making here will affect their own child.
Yep.
Right? They'll affect everyone's child. So the standards that we set here will also affect everyone's child, because those types of standards and accountability will also, will not only impact the children in programs, but if they're going to the same child care as my kids and your kids and everyone else. So hopefully I just want to emphasize that, because I think it's really important for everyone to understand that every child's at stake, not just, and I think, it's not just poor kids who should be very important and should have the same standards as everyone else, but also just to realize that we're all in together on this thing. So I hope that's why I think it's really important we emphasize the accountability piece. The other question is that we call this a block grant, and usually when they say block, it's a fixed amount of money. But I only just ask, and probably the answer will still be it's a fixed amount of money. Is it a fixed amount of slots or a fixed amount of money? Because what happens, we're talking about adjusting the regional, for the market share and so forth, that's going to be different amounts of money. So depending on shifts in our economy, are we going to have shifts on the total number of slots because we have a fixed amount of money? Or are we going to fix the number of slots and let the money float to meet those number of slots? And we'll adjust the number of slots, of course, based on the need. So what are we block granting? Are we block granting on money, or are we block granting on slots?
So currently, the child care programs that we have in place receive growth and COLA. Growth is based on the change in the 0 to 4 population, and then COLA is aligned to the K through 14 COLA. And we anticipate keeping those adjustments in future years, of course, with every budget year, if we get into another recession, obviously, but we do anticipate continuing with the growth and COLA adjustments.
So I'm hoping that perhaps an indication that perhaps our policy goal, I realize we have financial things to deal with, vicissitudes we have to deal with in the state, that our goal is actually we're trying to block grant based on number of slots, and that we're making adjustments, COLAs and other things to counter the fact that we have, economy will change and grow and so forth. I hope that's our policy goal.
I would mention that to the extent that it is currently our policy goal, and that we adjust how much funding we provide for growth, and that goes directly to augmenting the number of slots we provide, and we provide COLA on that for at least the standard reimbursement rate affects the rate at which we provide those slots, that we would continue that.
Okay, so that's good. I mean, certainly we have population growth, we have growth in costs, COLAs. Obviously we'll look at need and demand, but I'm happy to hear that hopefully that is actually what our policy aspirations are. I'll put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pan. Senator Allen, then Senator Morlock, and then I think we're going to go on to our third panel.
Okay, first of all, I want to associate myself with the comments made by the LAO and by Lonnie Hancock and others. We're talking about part-time programs, and it's just still not a reality for most working families in terms of making it work. We clearly need a lot more money in this entire system. I just wanted to, I have a little bit of a concern with your answer about this issue that Senator Leno had brought up involving the impact on minimum wage families in higher minimum wage cities. I think if you look at a dual parent situation, at least under the current situation, they would be exempted, because if you've got a $15 hour minimum wage, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, 2 parents, that's, $62K a year. And so I wanted to just kind of make sure that you're thinking about that in the context of,
Again, I'm going to have the numbers off a bit, but there's something like 80-some% of families participating in subsidized childcare are single-parent families.
what percentage?
Something like 83%. So the vast majority of families would not be affected. And then of those who are dual families, I don't think we have the data, but what you hear more commonly is that even some of these families, they're not working full-time. And so this is not to say no family would be affected, it's just to say the vast majority would not be.
Okay.
No, that is a concern. There will be folks who are tipping at the point. So Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a
Yeah.
quick question. Ms. Holmes, you mentioned that the early education block grant is proposed. So I'm assuming, is that number included in the January budget?
That's correct, yes.
And you also stated that you will maintain what they have in funding, not proposing additional funding. So you also said no details and more details in May. So I'm assuming that that number will still stay the same, but you're focused on program efforts, not dollar efforts.
So we have built into the number that's in the governor's budget, we have built in growth in COLA. And those numbers do get updated at the May revision, so that may shift slightly depending on what those numbers look like. Also, if I could predict what the revenues are going to look like in May, I would be making a lot more money than I currently do. So I don't know what's going to happen in May and what is going to happen on the expenditure side.
When you refer to not knowing details, you're just talking about
The program details.
forecasts. Is that what you're saying?
When I talk about not knowing details, I'm referring specifically to the structure of the program and what that would look like. However, I will mention that, all things maintaining the same on the resources side, we are anticipating maintaining this amount of funding in the May revision.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That is a statement you will hear repeatedly from the Department of Finance as we go through these coming months. So I think we have exhaustive questions from the committee. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Ms. Holmes, for your presentation. Of course, Ms. Early and Ms. Kuhn also for your responses. As this is a work in progress, I think we're getting at least some idea of the direction the finance is going in and some of the things that we need to be very vigilant and concerned about as we move forward. So we're going to ask our next panel to come up. That would be Jack Hinojosa, who is with a Ventura County Child Development Resources Program, Marco Jimenez with the Central Valley Children's Services Network, and Denise Adams, who's with Ocean View School District. Welcome all. And we'll start with Mr. Hinojosa.
Senator Leno?
Oh, yes, Senator Mitchell.
If I may, just before the panel
course.
begins, because I'm thinking perhaps Mr. Hinojosa, my former colleague, could answer that. But if someone on the panel would also, in their presentation, respond to Senator Mining and Senator Allen's question about the cliff effect around eligibility as a result of the increase in minimum wage, just because I don't know that I agree with the LAO's view of the fact that could not be a potential problem. So if they could respond also, that would be helpful.
We will keep that in mind. Also, I'm sure Ms. Kuhn would ask me to restate that she said there isn't the concern that there would be some. She's just saying the vast majority would not.
I got it.
Right. No, there always is concern there will be some.
Got it. Thank you.